I'm not understanding what you're saying.
At what point?
So you're going to get an order of conditions at some point. And what do you have in mind to do at that point? You're going to go in and pull out the tanks after you get the order of conditions?
Well, yeah, the first order of conditions would be for the demolition. So yes, as part of the demolition, they would, pull out the tanks. They would see whether there's any
And
contamination.
then after you finish the demolition, you'd be ready to file for your building permit.
Right.
And at that point, you would do the 21E?
Well, I think the 21E would probably be done before, because the funding for demo and all that presumably is from the lender. But,
I don't understand the
Getting
problem.
confused.
No,
Well,
that's
Steve-
not exactly.
okay.
It depends on how it plays out with Concom, with demolition, and with the order of conditions for this permit. And what I'm saying, my position is that I want to roll the financing of, if there is any cleanup to be done on that site, I want to roll that financing in to the project, the construction of the new building. The demolition is the reason that the applications are separate is because I have an agreement with the town of Milton as a result of a 139 hearing that would move forward with the demolition of the site. So that's why they had to be split out. The timing of this just happens that nothing has happened since then, but this has been an ongoing thing for over a year as well. So they're starting to overlap, but they are separate issues. I may only get a demo order conditions first from Concom. I don't know how long it's going to take to get an order conditions for this permit. So that's why we want to have this separate from this condition, because I don't know timing-wise how it's going to flush out. There's nobody avoiding the tank. Avoiding tanks or avoiding any issues down there. As of right now, the documentation that we have, we don't have a problem down there. And I certainly don't want to go looking for a problem.
But in any event, you're going to do a 21E report. It's
Yes,
just a question-
absolutely.
It's just a question of when.
Yes.
And I think you should be doing it with for the demolition, not waiting until you're doing your site development. I
Well,
mean, you need to know, we don't even know whether there's other stuff there. The monitoring wells haven't been checked for forever, the building's falling down, I mean, who knows what's going on there?
Well-
I think it's, from, as I said, from our perspective, the earlier that there's a licensed professional looking at that project, the better. And waiting until you've demolished it to get an LSP out there, I think is risky.
What's the risk, Kathleen? I'm not sure.
Well,
I
who knows
understand.
how much worse the situation could get, what they do with the demolition. You need to have somebody monitoring the demolition to make sure that you're not making the situation worse. You're right next to the river. We already know there's some little pipe that apparently goes underneath the rail line and into the Neponset without anything protecting it. So it seems to me that there needs to be some better protection done for the demolition than there would be even for the construction.
No, we had all hazardous materials removed from that building, and the Conservation Commission has the documentation of the removal and the disposal sites where the stuff was shipped to. There's nothing in that building. The question with Conservation right now is they have a question about the oil tank, the waste oil tank and the fuel oil tank that's out in the open parking lot, and it's 10 feet below the ground. What we're talking about for the demolition is to relieve the safety hazard that the town has cited. That's what that demo is all about. Otherwise, it would all be in the one site plan application. So, and the thing is, the town has a collapsed building down there. I don't. Town has the collapsed building. So we have to act on this, the town has to act on this. They've damaged our building down there. There's a safety hazard there, according to the building commission. So, we have to move on this. And what they want to do is talk about oil tanks that are in the ground. What I've already stated at the Conservation Commission, that before we do any construction, I'll open those tanks and make sure they're empty. Just to make sure, so that no matter what happens down on that site, there won't be a problem. So the oil tanks have nothing to do with demolition of that site. And to say that there's something going on in there, the site's been vacant since the late 80s. There's nothing going on in that site. And there hasn't been. And there's no requirement for us to be monitoring those wells anyway. That's a closed case, permanent solution found. As far as I know, you can't get a better solution. And depending on the use, residential use requires the highest level of cleanup for a site. And we're just getting to a point where I'm going to have a use. So I want to be afforded an opportunity to get my ducks in a row, have a good game plan down there, and knock this job out. And that's just putting the cart before the horse here. That's all that's going on.
Let me just go back and understand this again, because maybe it's just late in the day and it's been a long day. So you're gonna go in there, you're gonna knock the building down.
Right,
Then you wanna pull the tanks.
right.
And after you've completed those two missions, and before you get your building permit, you're gonna do a 21E report of the site at that point to see what's there.
The 21E will probably be done,
Well, I think,
will
Steve,
be
we,
done after the demolition, but before the tanks are pulled. I'll have an LSP on board, because you need one to be pulling tanks out anyway. You have to have.
Why don't we just say that in here then? Doesn't that solve the problem?
yeah, that's fine. Again,
Just change it from building permit to after the tanks are, after the demolition of the building, but before the removal of tanks, the 21E report will be done. Seems to me it'd be a good
Okay.
compromise.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
I mean, that's not going to get us into any inconsistent timing with the Conservation Commission, is it? Because I do remember Mr. Kiernan being in here and expressing concern about 21E and everything. And I mean, are they going to impose that as some kind of a condition? And is our timing apt to be different from what they might come up with in terms of?
It could be. That was my initial reason, as I think I said a few minutes ago. Maybe I was inarticulate. It happens. But yeah, that was my initial concern, is possible inconsistency. But that said, I think the compromise proposed by Mr. Hurley is reasonable. If there is an inconsistency, we can tell the Concom what you guys want. If they say something else, if we needed to come back to you, we'd tell you, and, you know, I mean, it would be worked out, I think, between the two boards. So,
Well, I mean, could we say in there, provided however, that if the Concom wants a different date, that the Concom will control? I think it's unlikely that the Concom is gonna want a different date, but, I mean, I don't wanna come back here and have a
Do a modification.
sit-down of who's right about the date.
Right.
As much as I like you guys, I really wanna be done with
yeah, I was
this
just
one.
gonna say, you
and,
mean, you know.
sign that decision.
No, that's fine, although
Resign
not,
from the board at that
not-
point, so.
you know, same thing, you know, Concom/DEP. I mean, hopefully we're not in appeals, but, you know,
Well, you have that in here anyway.
no, that's, I mean, that's in another section, but, you
Right,
know.
but,
So
so if we
couldn't it say after demolition, before removal, unless the Concom specifies a
Right.
different date?
Yeah, Concom or
Or
a superseding order, yeah. That's
Okay.
fine, that's fine.
Does that work for you for a construction perspective, Mr. Herman?
I'd rather, if we're gonna keep this language, I'd rather not refer to Concom, as long as this language affords me the opportunity to take the building down first, then tackle the tanks. Then whatever happens with, we're gonna have to wrestle that out with Concom, because some members are of a different mind on that board. I'm not comfortable with.
Mr. Freeman, you want to consult with your client for a minute? I should have asked you instead of your client, I apologize.
Oh, that's okay. Tell you what, yes, I should, but maybe we should just go through everything else.
All right, let's go through everything
Let's go
else.
through everything else and we'll
Yeah.
come back to it, because, yeah,
It seems
thanks.
like it should be a soluble
I agree.
problem.
Okay. Infrastructure, you know, was repeating, you know, which, the town isn't gonna be responsible for their stormwater management system, their driveways, their parking areas, snow plowing, all their connections, the lighting, trash disposal, recycling is all gonna be handled by them. Site utilities are all gonna be, you know, handled by them. Then was the question about the, in 18, I'd put, if the town determines that it was necessary to hire consultants to review building plans, the applicant would like to have that be the board determines that it's necessary to hire consultants. I didn't think that you really, as you just said, that you really wanted to have continued involvement.
I don't, and I don't feel like well, I speak for myself, I don't think we have the expertise to be reviewing the kinds of plans that are listed here. It makes no
No.
sense to me that we would do that. So I'd like it to be the town.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with that, other than the town is just too kind of amorphous, are we gonna have, or
So
multiple
do you wanna have the
headed,
building
know.
You wanna have
commissioner?
the
Yeah,
building-
the building
All right,
commissioner is
Building
fine.
commissioner,
That's fine.
let's make that consistent throughout.
Yep, that's fine. And then he wanted to make reasonable costs, and
I
that's
think
fine.
it always should be reasonable.
Yeah.
Attorney's fees.
Right,
Always.
exactly.
I mean, page number 9 looks.
On page 9, the only the only issues on that was to make sure it was the town engineer that was reviewing, but I think we're all gonna make that consistent with the building commissioner.
Right.
And it's gonna be the building commissioner all the time. And that reasonable consultant fees, that's fine. Construction is at the bottom of 9 and continues on to the next page, and I didn't know on 10, what your time periods were gonna be for,
just the hours
the
of
construction
construction.
on this site. I didn't know what you normally put in your decisions.
We've never done a 40B decision that I know of, so.
Well, any kind of large construction, well, we don't really have
really
big
have any.
constructions here, but,
We tend to leave that to the discretion of the building commissioner.
Right.
okay,
We invest substantial authority in the building commissioner so as to give the town flexibility in terms of the enforcement, while at the same time allowing the builder, the developer, the type of flexibility that they
Yeah,
need
you
in
okay
order to
with
get the
that? Yeah,
building done.
That's fine. That-
Okay.
yeah, that's-
No,
okay.
no, we just have we just have normal
No.
ordinance.
Yeah, I mean, as I said, some towns do, have provisions for that, so. And then, in 24, there was just a question about, there had been some discussion about removal of ledge and excavation. Applicant's attorney wants to add in 24, if there's removal of ledge, if any, and the approximate number of necessary truck trips, and I don't have a problem with either one of those
Okay.
changes. In 25, I had a provision in here that said the construction was supposed to be completed within a year. And the applicant would like that deleted.
Why-
There's-
why?
There's a practical and a legal. The practical is, I think it'll really chill my chances of getting a construction loan, because a lender's gonna say, well, I mean, there's all kinds of reasons why it may not be completed with a year, and what the heck are we gonna do? Suddenly you're out of compliance, and this board, you reasonable folks may not be here, and we don't get an extension. I mean, and I'm serious. I mean, I'm in the middle of writing several zoning opinions, they rely on me, and it really is a non-starter with a lender to say, well, it doesn't even have an acts of God or, force majeure clause in here, and obviously we don't want to make it into a lengthy construction or insurance contract. That's a practical reason, and it's very seldom that they're ever done, and the reason that they're seldom ever put in is there are specific lapse provisions in the regulations, and of course I just happen to have it here, 56.0511, 10C, the lapse, it's very clear. The only lapse provision for 40B is if you don't start construction within 3 years of the grant of the permit. And once you start construction, you're subject to normal case law and building protocol. You get a building permit, you start within 3 years. If, theoretically, if you start and stop and don't come back for 4 more years, might the building permit be invalidated, and might the permit at that point have lapsed? Possibly, but that's a different situation. And the other thing is, even within the lapse provisions and the provisions in another section of the CMR for 40B, extensions of a comprehensive permit are to be liberally granted. The regulation basically says that it's typically to be, if an applicant requests an extension, excuse me, on a permit, then the regulations themselves say they're to typically be treated as an insubstantial change, and typically that means that they're to be granted unless there's some extreme, change in circumstances in the area that would somehow create a harm to the town. So, it's virtually impossible to enforce anyway. The 3 years, not starting, that's different. We don't start within 3 years. If we didn't get an extension, shame on us, it lapses. But this, is just not right from a borrower's perspective, and it doesn't really add anything.
What if we just left the first sentence in? That's more hortatory than.
Well, I mean, it's better, but a lender's gonna still say, well, it must be in there for some reason.
Well, it's because we want this, project moving along.
Well, I understand, but,
Something like 18 months, would that help, or?
I mean, from a pragmatic viewpoint, you do know, as opposed to, and I say this in all seriousness, You know, because again, it is, I understand, you know, I respect where you're coming from, even though I do disagree, but, you know, it's not a project that's gonna be phased. I mean, once it starts, this building is presumably gonna be built, you know, so on the one hand, you might say, then why are you worried? On the other hand, I say, well, I have to worry, but, you know, with a project where you could build the first street and first 10 or 15 units in a subdivision or even a cluster, and then maybe the rest of it is left hanging, which could be a concern and liability for the town, you know, that's not gonna happen here. I mean, they have to build it all at once. It's not a phased project. So, you know, overall, I think it just really creates problems for us and doesn't really add anything to the town.
All right, why don't we come back to that?
In 26, the applicant wants to add to the maximum extent feasible, no erosion would occur off-site, and then he wanted to cross out the plans showing the catch basins and the site perimeter controls, and the applicant made the comment that, you know, most of that's gonna be covered by the stormwater management permit and by the order of conditions, and I agree with that. I don't have a problem with taking that out of this particular
Okay,
clause.
good.
And the 27, I mean, this is gonna be tricky anyway, because they've got whenever the Mattapan line is starting to run again, that's gonna be right there, and the river's right there, so the applicant has suggested some changes to that 27, and that they're gonna use their best efforts, but I actually liked my language better, which was that if there was any issue at all, they were gonna stop and cease and desist until they had done the remedial work. I don't think best efforts to remedy the situation really work, given this location, but I leave that to you folks to decide.
Probably at least a two-part response. One is, the reason I inserted best efforts is it says within 1 business day of notification. And, you know, you could be bending over backwards to comply and all of that, but you may not be able to mobilize whatever piece of equipment needs to be there within 1 day. I mean, this is a quick example that's perfectly possible. So, you know, again, I didn't propose to strike within 1 business day. That's why I feel the need to say use best efforts. And again, cease and desist. I mean, you know, theoretically, if, you know, like a kid's little bucket of sand from the beach, you know, if that amount of sand gets deposited, you know, maybe practical people aren't going to bother to call that a violation, but literally the way it's written, that would be a violation. So we're going to cease and desist and shut down the whole job for something that's really quite de minimis. And then the second point is, and I don't mind working on the language, but the second point is, again, the one of repetition or redundancy, maybe not inconsistency, but, you know, this is going to be closely monitored by both the stormwater management permit with DPW and, again, the order of conditions. So there's really not much to worry about. So, again, I'm not saying to strike it, although I think the last comment I made would support striking it.
What
but-
if you added a sentence that said, use your language, take out the language that's in there, but then you had a sentence that said, if the remedy isn't implemented within a week of notification, then there's a cease and desist.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that, you know, that's probably okay. Again, I think it, you know, that's more practical, that's the
Okay.
main concern.
Is that,
Yep.
I mean, does that mean that any off-site erosion could continue for a week? I mean, is that part of the concern? That it would just-
Well, as I said, given the
Yeah.
site, I was worried about,
Yeah.
you know, either impact on the MBTA tracks, which is a problem.
I'm just trying to come to a
No,
compromise.
I know, I'm
you know?
just asking a question.
But the answer, I think, is yes.
Okay.
But if they didn't do it within a week,
Yeah.
then they'd be shut down.
But, yeah, that could last for a week. The problem could continue for a week before they were shut down, yeah.
Right, but the fact that there's a possible shutdown is another factor aside from whatever, you know, whatever stick under the order of conditions exists.
That was
So
my
the-
thought, was to give them some incentive to move quickly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Page 11, number 28, I had just put in that, you know, they were allowed to have 1 sign, they want to have 2. You know, that's up to you folks, where the signs are and what they look like. I don't know what your normal practice in something like that is, but I don't have a problem with
I
that.
don't think we have a normal practice. 2 signs would be fine with me, I don't really.
Yeah.
Well, there's a sign review committee, I believe, which we have a signed bylaw.
Is that on the list of Peter's waivers? I didn't know that. I saw
Don't
that.
know, it may not be, because we usually deal with it by some condition, but, I mean, well,
But I don't have a problem with saying that.
I mean, I don't think, you're going to have to comply with the signed bylaw as it is anyway, so I don't care if it's one side or two sides, it's just
Yeah.
it's going to have to comply with the bylaw.
Mhm.
okay.
And it is going to be the building commissioner that'll have
Right.
an
Yep.
initial review
Right.
of it anyway,
So,
Yeah.
that's fine.
On 29, I had put in language in here about the applicant providing a blasting or drilling plan, because there had been testimony presented at the hearings that talked about ledge and the removal of ledge for the construction of the parking garage. The applicant proposes to add, take out the word applicant, and if, only if the construction entails, I believe that was supposed to be that word,
Right.
blasting or drilling, they'll provide that plan. Well, if you didn't need to do blasting or drilling,
I mean, it seems to
Yeah, I
me
mean, the word,
that's-
I admit that those words, it doesn't really matter whichever way it winds up, because obviously if there is none, then we don't
You're
have
not
to
gonna do
submit
it,
one,
right,
so
yeah.
maybe a brain cramp when I looked at that.
Then, prior to the issuance of the certificates of occupancy, they're supposed to be submitting an as-built plan signed by a registered professional engineer that shows all the construction. That's gonna be submitted to the building commissioner. And then, supporting letters that indicate that everything's been built the way it's supposed to be built. The general provisions are just the usual ones, that the inspections are gonna be, the permits binding on successors of assessors and assigns. Any part that's held, invalid isn't gonna invalidate the entire decision. You get to retain jurisdiction, you send the copies, all that sort of thing. Let's see, on the last page, on page 12, I had added a clause about any default or violation of the conditions that wasn't cured within 30 days. The town could, seek to cure that, either have the applicant cure the default, or, bring an action to compel compliance, and the applicant's attorney would like to have that stricken.
And the simple reason is there are enforcement provisions, again, in the CMR, there are enforcement provisions in 40B that don't really take away, it doesn't diminish the powers of the zoning enforcement officer or the board to enforce a decision. It just seems to be getting a bit overly detailed, talking about mandamus and particular time period, and, including, having access to books and records and inspect things, which is so open-ended, it's like, I honestly was confused by it. You don't necessarily have to have access to records of ours. If there's an enforcement and, it gets into discovery, so be it. But to say, well, we're in violation of something, and then you say, it almost sounds like, Big Brother. Okay, you're in violation, now we're coming in, open up your books and give us everything, which it's just way open-ended. So again, I'm not trying to get out of any responsibility, but you're well protected by the enforcement provisions under 40B and general, general zoning law.
What if we just had the last sentence?
That's what I was thinking,
If you what?
the last
The last
sentence.
sentence. The other is all,
Yeah, if you just, if
Saying
there is,
that
if there
things
is,
that you can
if
do
there is
anyway.
enforcement, that we pay for it if, yeah.
Yeah,
As long as you add that if we prevail, the town pays.
aha. That's not enforceable,
I say
there's
that
no
with a smile, because I
appropriation.
don't, what?
There's no appropriation for it, you can't,
Yeah,
indemnification for which there is no appropriation, those are
yeah,
non-enforceable.
as a municipal law, that rings a bell. So that's fine.
Question out of curiosity, the CMR regulations, are they different from 30 days, or are they 30 days, or do you know?
No, it doesn't, I don't think it specifies a time
I don't-
period.
Yeah.
It doesn't?
No.
I think if we have that last sentence, that's
Yeah,
all.
no,
we
I
have.
was just curious.
Yeah.
That's fine.
That's fine. And then the list of waivers is supposed to be on page 14. And I don't know, Peter, I didn't see in your draft that you had added that.
Well, no, I mean, you know, we had discussed them briefly in the course of the hearings. It's what we requested, is still what we're requesting.
Okay,
You know, the only,
So that list is in the application, isn't it? The
Right.
original? You have the original
I do.
application? List whatever they listed there, we can do more,
I just
do no
didn't know
more.
whether, the- Yes. Oh, yeah, I got it. Tab 4. So on the waivers, the applicant has requested waivers from otherwise applicable building permit and water and sewer connection fees for the affordable units only. It's on page 1, behind tab 4. I think that's the only,
That's the only questionable one? I mean,
well, I think the ones, I mean, the use regulations, you know, that's kind of, you know, the earth material removal and deposit of fill. I don't know really why, why do you need a waiver of that requirement, Peter? On the earth removal?
I didn't bring the whole zoning bylaw, at least I don't think I do, but I think it's susceptible of interpretation that, you know, for any earth removal, you know, you need I'm not sure if it was from selectmen or from the zoning board, but there's some type of permit that's supposed to be required.
Yeah, so you're asking for the waiver of the earth removal permit
Right, well, yeah.
requirement?
the list.
That was dealt with in one of the memos, I think. Wasn't it? You also had a question on the conservation commission.
Since we talked about that, I don't remember why we asked that. That was weird.
Have you had a chance to go through these, Kathleen?
No, I got that.
The waivers?
Yeah.
No, because I was wondering if Peter was gonna send me a different list or updated list, but, I will. Because you're gonna have to vote those waivers.
Right.
Right.
I mean, the dimensional requirements, the height requirements, the area, the parking regulations, we've covered those by conditions that are in the permit. But the earth removal, the only thing that I've asked for was about the removal of the ledge and the truck trips that the building commissioner will be reviewing. I don't know whether there's something else in there that,
For Roman numeral 4A. We're looking it up. Roman numeral 4A, 4.
Section 3.
It's on section 3. You said it was potentially circular.
There you go. I'm looking. Oh my.
So what it says is somewhat lengthy, so I won't read the whole thing, but Roman numeral 4A, the removal of loam, soil, clay, sand, gravel, stone, or other earth material from any land in the town of Milton is hereby prohibited, except as may be authorized by a permit issued by the board, so you are issuing a permit, and except as such removal is permitted by subsection 5, so it's pretty broad. 5 says, section 5 says. I went by it. There. The provisions of section 4 shall be deemed not to prohibit the removal of earth material as may be necessary for the purpose of constructing foundations for buildings or for other allowable construction for which building permits have been issued, or for the purpose of constructing ways, or for the purpose of constructing water. So it may be susceptible of interpretation that if we're removing it related to our building permit, maybe it doesn't apply. I just wasn't sure exactly how it's interpreted, and so I think that's the part that we actually did discuss at one of the hearings.
We did.
If you're comfortable that 5 means we're okay to remove earth and fill, because we're doing it in conjunction, you know, for the project for which we have a building permit, then I would acknowledge then it's not a necessary waiver.
That's how I read it.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's how we've interpreted it
Yeah.
in the past.
We have.
Yep, okay, so one less thing, that's fine.
Okay. All right.
The only other one that has sort of been the subject of some discussion in the past is the local wetland bylaw waiver.
But I thought we had a letter from council saying that he didn't think that they needed one.
No, that's not at all, it's just the opposite. What we said is, we said that the concern of the board was, is the bylaw, the local bylaw, more stringent than the DEP regulations, provisions on wetlands that we naturally have to comply with? And my memo dated November 20th, 2014, went through a very point-by-point comparison to which there's been no refutation. And I said, so this should satisfy you that by granting the waiver, which is procedural, saying we don't need to go to the Concom under the local, you know, you're not exposing any harm or risk to the town. So I still respectfully submit we want the waiver. It, to me, doesn't make sense to have yet another forum and another, you know, admittedly, possibility for, you know, for some contentiousness. It's clear that your bylaw isn't more stringent, but, you know, we think it should be dealt with purely under the state, as is typical of 40B, in such a circumstance. If there was a substantive provision which we said, you know, no, we can't comply. So, I mean, there were a couple of things. If you were worried that we were trying to get a carte blanche, there are a couple of things, and quite honestly, I think I did spell out, if you want to, you know, after tonight, as you further draft the waiver, either the waiver or a condition, there are a couple of standards that I said, yeah, you know, we'll comply. I think it was erosion, siltation prevention, catch basins, oil separators. There are a few things. I think it's on page 4 of, again, my November 20th, 2014 memo.
I recall that.
Yeah,
Okay.
so
So
again.
you would address that by conditions,
Yeah.
but otherwise grant
Then
the
you
waiver
grant
of the
right.
bylaw. I mean, that makes
Yeah.
sense to me.
Yeah.
I think that's sort of the solution that we had kind of,
No, that's what typically happens.
we hadn't voted on it, but I
Right.
think that's the direction
Well, that's
we
where we
headed.
were heading, because
Yeah.
I remember that letter and that discussion.
Yeah,
Okay.
Okay.
I think that's it. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I assume you're denying the requested waiver of building and permit and water sewer connection fees for the affordable units.
I don't see any reason to grant that waiver, frankly.
No, me neither.
It's a good reach by Peter, but I don't see it.
we always reach, and sometimes we grasp.
All right, so from a process
Okay.
standpoint, you're going to take a hand at trying
I'm
to,
gonna take a hand.
Shall we
Cap-
take,
go ahead.
sorry for interrupting, I did it. 2-minute recess to talk about that one other one? I think there's 2 we
The
need to
Concom?
There were
quickly come
two,
back
there were
to.
2 we said we were going
Yeah.
to come back to.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's fine.
Yeah, thanks.
Let's do that.
We won't be long.
Take as long as you need. We are in recess.